Good day, everyone, dear listeners to this ITC lecture on Theosophical Science. As messenger of the Masters of Wisdom, H.P. Blavatsky brought back in human thought the fundamental idea that all things are fundamentally consciousness. Based on this key thought, Theosophy offers explanations in all fields of human life, explanations which cannot be found in our present scientific theories, which are almost all based on the materialistic point of view. That means that matter is dead, lifeless, without an intelligent force working behind it. H.P. Blavatsky showed that the whole cosmos lives. It consists of countless centers of consciousnesses, of monads, in all various levels of development. And what generally is called matter are, in fact, beings of a low level of development. According to our human senses, anorganic things seems to be inert matter, but the opposite is the case. They consist of elementary beings interacting very intensively with each other. All cosmic beings form a hierarchically layered, living whole, sprung from a fundamental unity, from a common source. Therefore, all beings are inseparably connected to each other, directly or indirectly. They continually influence each other, and our ethical sense and our compassionate ideals naturally follow from our realization of our essential unity with all that lives. Why is the seemingly theoretic topic of theosophical science yet so important in the light of the future of humanity? The point is, the current scientific views have a very great impact on human thinking. Many people believe the dominant scientific theories because they trust the scientists or are not willing to develop a critical investigating view. The result is a widely spread, soulless, uninspired view of life. In this light, we recognize the great importance of the inspiring impulse given by the Lodge of Wisdom and Compassion since the last quarter of the 19th century, to remind humanity of its divine origin and destiny. First of all, let us investigate what do we mean by theosophical science. By this, we mean all investigative, intellectual searching for facts and natural laws that is led by religion and philosophy. These words, religion and philosophy, used in their essential sense. This definition needs some elaboration. In yesterday's ITC lectures on religion and philosophy, we heard already that Teosofía, the one coherent universal wisdom, can be viewed from three perspectives: the religious, philosophical, and scientific level of understanding. By religion, in its essential sense, we mean our insights into the common essence of all things and into the purpose of our lives. Our religious insights have their roots in the divine levels of our mind. By philosophy, we mean our understanding of the causal processes behind the outer forms. These philosophical insights flow from our spiritual mental capacities, and our scientific knowledge stems from our intellectual level of thinking. Our hearts and minds can never be truly satisfied if we have not found answers on all these three levels in one integrated whole. If one or two are lacking, dogmatism will always ensue. For instance, science, separated from the other two, is nothing more than a bundle of intellectual hypotheses about the outer world, giving us no clue about their deeper cause, and giving us no clue about the ethical principles of the cosmos. Only our religious and philosophical insights are able to direct wisely and safely all our scientific efforts. Please note, all men and women have these religious and philosophic and scientific capacities of mind. So, we emphatically do not restrict the term theosophical scientist to only those persons who may have formal grades or titles. No, we mean all humans who exercise their universal faculties of mind. We are able all to investigate the principles of the universe, all at all its levels and all its departments, as all elements and forces in the universe are also in us as human beings, as we are the child of the macrocosmos. We ourselves are a complete universe, based on the same fundamental patterns, and therefore we can resonate, in principle, with all planes and characteristics of the whole cosmos. Well, based on these multi-level capacities of our human mind, we can make a valuable schematic distinction between several types of scientific thinkers. Each type based on the question which of our levels of thought are dominant, which are leading. First, we point to universal scientists. These are those scientists who think and live from the one universal wisdom and understand that religion and philosophy and science cannot be separated. Then, secondly, we may mention the scientists who have intuitional hunches. For instance, Isaac Newton, James Clerk Maxwell, Albert Einstein, Roger Penrose, to name just a few examples. They have some Buddhic insights which they try to translate into scientific theories, which is usually a prolonged and difficult challenge. H.P. Blavatsky and in general the Theosophical Society had in the beginning direct contacts with some very intuitional scientists, like William Crookes, who was pioneering with vacuum tubes at the start of the electronic era. The third category are the pragmatical, intellectual, profit-driven scientists who concentrate on intellectual details and use the intellectual knowledge to create all kinds of technical applications meant to fulfill one or another desire or demand. This is a very large group. And we can add as fourth group those who popularize scientific knowledge to the large public. For instance, teachers and journalists. The first group are those rare scientists who think and work from the principles of universal wisdom, the Teosofía. The second group consists of scientific pioneers who are able to explore entirely new departments of scientific inquiry The third group works their ideas out and uses the knowledge to create profit. And the last group tries to explain it in easily understandable language, hopefully not dogmatizing theories as if they were facts. In all cases, the search for knowledge may be motivated by unselfish or selfish reasons or goals. This motivation determines greatly what influence such a scientific thinker has on the world, producing maybe valuable insights into and inspiring solutions to the world problems, or maybe instead harming people by misusing scientific knowledge, or using techniques that create much more problems than they seem to solve, or are downright dangerous for people and planet. Now, we come to this important point. What was the impact that the impulse of 1875 had on the science of the 20th and 21st centuries? This is, of course, not easy to determine, because the spiritual mental impulse that the masters gave via H.P. Blavatsky and her co-workers primarily works on the spiritual mental level. However, we can point out some general tendencies and some telling examples. As you will know, the crystallized, dogmatic, materialistic conceptions of the 19th century have been overthrown by completely new approaches, which are more in line with theosophy, like the relativity theory and quantum theory. And we see that the present-day theories in physics and related scientific fields are clearly more focused on the energy side of the outer world than on its matter side. Now, Einstein already posited the energy-matter equivalence. But let us mention also two more examples. You probably have heard of the theory of the Higgs field and the Higgs particles, which tries to explain why particles have the mass that they have. This theory is remarkably close to the ancient idea of an ether, of a medium which is the hidden source of all physical things, which are, in fact, concretized, crystallized, ethereal substance. The ideas of Rupert Sheldrake about morphogenetic fields are also approaching that ancient teaching of ether. Another example is the fact that one starts to realize the importance of electricity and magnetism in the functioning of our bodies and in the large-scale processes in the cosmos. The HeartMath Institute in the United States has made interesting studies on the strong magnetic field that our heart emanates. And the astronomer Hannes Alphen launched the concept of the plasma universe, or in other words, the electric universe. There is also nowadays a very small but growing number of scientists who study the proposition that consciousness is behind all phenomena. Often they derive their ideas from former theosophical impulses, for instance from the writings of Plato, as Bernardo Kastrup does, or from the ancient Veda texts, as ITC2025-13-ES does. Yet, unfortunately, we must say that the real pioneers in science are still often disqualified by their colleagues as unscientific or even mad. And then we may mention Rupert Sheldrake within biology, Hannes Alphen within astronomy, Roger Penrose within physics, and Pim van Lommel studying the continuity of consciousness in medical situations. Now, it may be illustrative to point out some specific theosophical principles that had a noticeable impact on modern science, on 20th and 21st century science, at least as an emerging new development. If we start from the first fundamental proposition of the secret doctrine about the boundless principle, we must conclude that all beings are fundamentally interconnected with all other beings. This principle is clearly reflected in the ecological science of the last 75 years, emphasizing the interrelatedness of humans, animals, plants, and minerals in the great planetary ecosystem. The Gaia theory is a strong example. And some biologists go even a step further and they question the validity of the neo-Darwinian idea of competition as driving force. One of them is the biologist Lane Gorrison, who recently made the following interesting statement. The species that endure longest on this planet are not the strongest or the smartest, but those who contribute to the big whole. Those who leave this planet better than they found it. A statement which, in our view, is worth to remember and ponder. The fact of the fundamental interconnectedness of all life has also had a great impact on modern physics. The scientists discovered that you cannot observe something without influencing it. Your observation always has some impact. This discovery necessitated a completely new look on what in the 19th century was called objective research, which now, in fact, is proven to be an illusion. Interestingly, the scientists could have discovered this fact much earlier if they had taken the ideas of Plato more seriously. Plato describes in his dialogue Timaeus that our capacity to see is much more than only the reception and processing of light from outside, but functions through the combination of the ethereal rays that our eyes emit and the visible rays which are emitted by the beings around us. So our sight and the fact each of our five senses is the result of interaction between us and the many entities around us. Another basic tenet of theosophy, of the ancient wisdom, is the Hermetic principle, as above, so below. Applied to us humans, this principle implies that we humans carry all elements, all forces and substances in us, that the grand cosmos has in itself. This principle of analogy is usually looked upon reluctantly by most scientists, but some recent observations almost force them to pay attention to this principle. One of these is their present knowledge of the cell. In each cell, they find an administrative center construction workplaces, power plants, a waste treatment service, a specific place where the waste is processed, an extensive infrastructure, a postal service, a kind of customs, and so on. In other words, a complete society with all its functionalities, astonishingly comparable to ours. And all in one cell not larger than 1/4 of a tenth of a millimeter. The teachings of Theosophy about the essential divinity and composite nature of man can also be traced in 20th century science, especially in the branch of psychology that is called psychosynthesis. This branch is initiated by Roberto Assagioli, who was member of the Theosophical Society. He built his therapies on the idea that people who struggle with some psychological problem have lost more or less their inner communication with their own inner divinity. This is, in fact, the same healing principle as has been applied in ancient times, for instance, in the temples of Asclepius. This psychiatric approach is still rarely applied nowadays, but who would say that it could not blossom forth in the coming messianic cycle of 2000 years? Finally, we touch shortly on a theosophical principle which is not recognized yet, that still plays virtually no role in modern science. And that is the principle of svabhava, that each individual being has developed a unique character throughout illimitable time, and that all the emanated forces of this individual necessarily carry the character of their source, of that being. That character is stamped upon these forces, as it were. The consequence is, as one of the masters pointed out to the Englishman A.O. Hume, that the apparently same amount of physical force exerted by two people having different goals in their minds will produce entirely different effects. A physicist would say, action is a reaction. If two forces are equal in strength, they must produce effects that are equal in strength. But the master points to the origin of a physical force. It is the outward manifestation of an inner force, which is composed of a spiritual, mental, and instinctual part. And the character of this inner driving force determines its effects. If one person has some spiritual mental aim, and another person is acting from some semi-automatic instinctual behavior pattern, then the action of the first person may exert a long-lasting, inspiring influence beneficial for humanity, while the action of the second person has only some personal profit for the moment, or even not that. So, we must always look behind the outer forces for their inner causal character, to foresee their inner impact on the world. We now come to our next thesis that we wish to present to you. Theosophy is as coherent and logic, or actually even more, as present-day science in its ideal form. The Teosofía, the divine wisdom, includes the highest level of scientific methodology, as it only accepts facts as truth when these facts are ascertained and reasserted by countless generations of adepts. Initiates of the hierarchy of compassion check independently all teachings of Teosofia by sending the consciousness into more inner planes of nature, directly observing and understanding the processes there, and rigorously compare their independent findings. The same attitude, the same approach, although of course our field of observation is more limited than that of an adept, we all can follow. Perhaps we must say we should follow if we are really searching for truth. Because if we do not wish to blindly believe the prepositions of theosophy, then we have to test them for ourselves. Only then we can make theosophy gradually, by our efforts, a part of our own developed wisdom and insight. How can we test theosophy? Well, exactly in the same way that high-level science does. It is the method that Plato described, as well as our theosophical teachers and their Chela Damodar. We sketch this method by dividing it schematically into 4 phases. It is the same as is done in mathematics. First, differentiation, and then integration back to the whole. First phase, you try to understand as well as you are able to the 3 fundamental propositions of the secret doctrine, including their ethical dimension. These propositions reflect archetypal ideas of higher cosmic beings, expressed in human language. When we start to do that, these very abstract principles will probably be still very vague for us. Maybe we already feel inspired, will probably feel already some inspiration in a vague way, but that will only be a kind of general sketch, an adumbration of reality. As if we stand on a high hilltop and see the world under us in total, but still clouded in mist. Secondly, then, the next step in our search for truth, you think through the logic consequences, the many consequences of these propositions, by means of deductive reasoning, reasoning from the general towards the particular. We take as an example the second fundamental proposition, the cyclic appearance and retreat of all universes, of all centers of consciousness in boundless space. We can conclude from this proposition that when we investigate with our astronomical instruments large numbers of star clusters, galaxies, we should always find galaxies in all phases of their life cycles, young, full-grown, and old. While one of them is busy to be born, another one is in the process of dying, so retracting its life into more spiritual spheres. And this is a hypothesis we can test. The third phase is the testing phase, by our observations and experiences in the world. To continue with our example, recently the James Webb Telescope made photos of galaxies very far away from us, and they saw the opposite of what they expected. They expected especially young clusters, because according to present theories, these clusters appeared relatively shortly after the assumed Big Bang. But in fact, they observed also fully grown ones, comparable to our own Milky Way. Then the last phase, the fourth one, it is the inductive phase, reasoning from our observations back to the general view. What do our discoveries mean for our general view of the cosmos? The observation of the James Webb Telescope confirms fully the second proposition of theosophy, but confronts the Big Bang theory with an anomalous fact. That means, logically, that either the Big Bang theory should be reformed or discarded, or the scientists must find a satisfactory explanation for this deviant observation. One of the two. In our eyes, this recent finding should encourage astronomers to give much more attention to cosmological theories based on cyclicity. What can we conclude? The way we can, or in fact should, check all theosophical teachings is not different and in fact wholly the same as the highest level scientific research methods. And furthermore, that we are never ready. We can never say that we found some ultimate truth, because truth is boundless. So we continue this deductive, inductive cycle always, and each time on a higher level with deeper questions that we try to solve. While our understanding of the theosophical principles grows, we will apply them in a wiser, more selfless way in our lives, and that will give us such an enormous richness of experiences that it will continually deepen and broaden our insights and ethical understanding of the principles, and so on. Our inner growth has no limits. We already said ethics is inherent in cosmic life. Theosophy teaches mankind that we are one with all that lives, and that consequently knowledge brings responsibility. Searching for truth is not only a pure intellectual puzzle. It is never an intellectual puzzle only. The fact is, the more knowledge and power we have, the greater is our influence on others, and the greater is our responsibility, with all the karmic consequences for others and for ourselves. Compare this principle of responsibility to the general tendency in our world today, which is everything which is technically possible may be done. Perhaps there are some discussions about its effects or side effects, but in practice we see, alas, that when people become accustomed to a new technique, the ethical and critical discussions melt away. The technique is accepted because it is already there and because you cannot stop developments in science. And the result of this attitude is that our ethical development is far lagging behind our intellectual and technical developments. This is very unfortunate and more dangerous, corresponding to our growing powers. Generally, science and technology is behaving like the sorcerer's apprentice in that famous story. And we would be much more careful when we would realize that. We would put much more energy in our spiritual and moral and mental and social development than in our technological development. The first mentioned efforts stimulate the developing of our immortal, reincarnating, inspiring part. But we will lose all our pragmatical intellectual, and technological knowledge when we die. Theosophy shows the logic of ethics and inspires us to make ethics and not techniques a living power in our lives. And the importance of the impulse of 1875 cannot be underestimated. The only fundamental protection of the mental and physical well-being of humanity lies in our decision, in the decision of all of us, to develop the selfless, understanding, compassionate faculties in us. Because then, and only then, we see the goal of human life and will use all technologies wisely, far-seeingly. Only then we give science the role that it should have according to its character, the helpful instrument of our universal ideals and principles, being subservient to true religion and true philosophy. What would a theosophical science concretely look like? First of all, then all researchers will realize that in our cosmos there are many groups of beings further progressed in consciousness than they themselves are. A wise scientist never thinks that his present ideas and his work, even if he works in the front line of science, are the pinnacle of human achievement. Instead, he is the willing student of human beings with a more universal scope of mind, because he has experienced the great value, spiritual, mental, and ethical, of their teachings. So he will try to become a valuable link in the stream of wisdom and compassion and peace. A theosophical scientist clearly understands the specific role of science in that stream of wisdom, to wit, to work out religious and philosophical insights and ideals in logically ordered knowledge and in attainable and practicable plans. Understanding that knowledge brings responsibility, some of the knowledge that may be severely misunderstood or misused will be restricted to those who in an earlier phase have proven to understand it and to use it only beneficially. Technological possibilities are only developed insofar as they definitively promote the general welfare. And the prospect of devising new technologies does not fascinate researchers, has no attraction on them, as nowadays is clearly the case. And very important, the motto of a more theosophical science will be: a true lover of truth cannot serve two masters. Scientific inquiry is made free from the influence of economic, financial, and personal interests. We can find many inspiring examples of this attitude in the past. For instance, the founding father of the modern classical homeopathy, Samuel Hahnemann, treated poor people for free. And he found it very important. The same rule is followed by some Vedic healers who still follow the ancient discipline. And Wilhelm Röntgen did not patent his discovery of X-rays. He believed that his discoveries should be quickly and freely available in hospitals and medical settings. So, he refused to request patents for his work. Finally, we wish to reiterate this inspiring thought: we possess all spiritual and mental capacities in the cosmos, so we can all develop into religious, philosophical scientists. Thus, we are able to help the lodge of wisdom of compassion in its great purpose and work. Thank you for your attention.